In 1958, Ford engineers proposed a family sedan with a nuclear reactor in the trunk. If you love uncovering bizarre automotive history like this, subscribe to the channel. Instead of stopping for gas, you would swap out a radioactive core every 10,000 miles. The Ford Nucleon was the ultimate atomic age fever dream, promising limitless power wrapped in a futuristic, glass-domed chassis. But was this terrifyingly audacious concept a real, functioning prototype, or just an elaborate piece of 1950s fiction? And why did Ford actually build it? To answer why Ford built the Nucleon, you have to look at the cultural mindset of America immediately after World War II. The atomic bomb had just reshaped global politics, but the government and scientists quickly pivoted to peacetime applications. Atomic energy was rapidly rebranded as a magical, limitless well of power that would solve all of humanity's problems. Citizens were promised a utopian future where nuclear fission would melt snow on sidewalks, power commercial airplanes, and generate electricity so cheap it would not even need to be metered. Just listen to this archival broadcast.
Nuclear blindness. All he can see is a mushroom cloud. He is blinded from the...
Automakers in Detroit were watching this cultural shift closely, and they faced a massive strategic dilemma. The standard internal combustion engine had dominated the roads for over 50 years, but nobody knew what would propel the vehicles of the year 2000. Futurists were pitching wildly different alternatives, from jet engine gas turbines to hovering platforms that glided on compressed air. Because automotive executives had absolutely no idea which technology would ultimately win out, they decided to place bets on all of them. Detroit transformed into a sandbox for extreme concepts, with companies building functioning prototypes just to ensure they would not be left behind by the next transportation revolution. Ford took the boldest leap of all by betting on uranium. They looked at the newly launched USS Nautilus, the first nuclear-powered submarine, and wondered why that same propulsion method could not fit in a suburban driveway. The prevailing assumption among 1950s engineers was that time and American ingenuity would simply overcome the laws of physics. They fully expected that scientists would soon figure out how to shrink a sprawling, multi-ton nuclear reactor down to the size of a standard V8 engine block. Furthermore, they assumed these miniature power plants would eventually become completely safe. Designers simply ignored the inconvenient reality that shielding human passengers from lethal gamma radiation requires thick walls of solid lead and concrete. Instead, they sketched out a bright future where you could drop an active atomic core into your trunk and safely drive your kids to school. Tasked with bringing this atomic dream to life, Ford's advanced styling studio got to work in 1957. The design team envisioned a vehicle that looked like it rolled straight out of a science fiction magazine. They completely abandoned the traditional American car shape, opting instead for a radical cab-forward design. The passenger cabin was pushed so far over the front axle that the steering wheel actually sat ahead of the front wheels. To complete the futuristic aesthetic, they crowned the cabin with a massive, one-piece transparent bubble canopy inspired directly by supersonic fighter jets of the era. This bizarre, elongated silhouette was not just an artistic statement. The shape was entirely dictated by the grim reality of the proposed power source. The designers had to solve a highly unusual automotive engineering challenge, keeping the driver and passengers safe from lethal radiation. Their primary solution was simply maximizing distance. By placing the human occupants as far forward as physically possible, they created a critical buffer zone between the cabin and the nuclear reactor. The designers knew that a real reactor would require heavy lead shielding, so they also imagined advanced electronic suspension systems to support that massive weight in the rear. The entire rear half of the vehicle featured a twin-boom pickup bed designed to cradle what Ford officially called the power capsule. This modular atomic engine was intended to be easily swappable. When the uranium core finally ran dry after 10,000 miles, owners would simply pull into a specialized station and have a crane drop in a fresh reactor. However, before we get too caught up in the fantasy of a radioactive family road trip, we have to debunk the biggest myth surrounding this legendary concept. Despite what the dramatic promotional photographs might suggest, Ford never built a functioning car. They never even constructed a full-sized mock-up. The vehicle you see in those famous 1950s images is an optical illusion, captured using clever forced perspective photography to make it look large. The only physical form the Nucleon ever took was a 45-pound, 3/8 scale red and black plastic model. It possessed no engine, no interior, and absolutely no uranium. It was a pure styling exercise, a stationary desk piece meant to capture the boundless optimism of the atomic age, rather than ever touch an actual highway. Even though the Nucleon was just a plastic model, Ford's engineers drew up incredibly detailed schematics for how the hypothetical power capsule would actually operate. Inside that rear cradle sat a miniaturized nuclear reactor fueled by uranium-235. This was not an internal combustion engine, but a completely closed-loop steam propulsion system, fundamentally shrinking the technology used in atomic submarines down to passenger car scale. The fission reaction inside the capsule would intensely heat a liquid coolant, converting it into high-energy steam. This pressurized steam was then forced into a specialized dual turbine configuration. The primary turbine was mechanically linked to the rear wheels, providing the massive torque required to propel the heavy vehicle forward. The secondary turbine functioned entirely as an onboard generator, spinning to produce all the electricity needed for the headlights, climate control, and the heavy-duty electronic suspension system. Once the steam rushed past the turbine blades, a large heat exchanger would condense the vapor back into liquid, looping it directly back into the reactor core to be heated all over again. Instead of a rumbling V8 engine, just listen to what engineers thought the future of American driving would sound like. This atomic steam engine promised unprecedented freedom from the gasoline pump. Ford projected a staggering driving range of 5,000 miles per core, a massive leap over any conventional fuel tank of the 1950s. To support this new paradigm, designers envisioned a complete overhaul of America's roadside infrastructure. The traditional corner gas station would become completely obsolete, replaced by highly specialized atomic swap stations. When your vehicle finally ran low on fissile material, you would not stand there holding a fuel nozzle. Instead, you would drive into a heavily shielded concrete bay. Specially trained technicians, operating mechanized overhead cranes, would simply hoist the entire spent power capsule out of the vehicle's rear bed. They would then drop a freshly loaded reactor into the cradle, lock it securely into the chassis, and send you back onto the highway for another 5,000 uninterrupted miles. The depleted cores would never be opened on site. Instead, they would be collected and shipped back to regional atomic facilities for safe refueling and disposal. This closed system ensured that the driver never directly handled hazardous radioactive material, keeping the atomic age road trip clean, efficient, and theoretically safe. The pristine atomic swap stations and closed-loop steam systems sounded incredibly convenient on paper, but Ford's design team deliberately ignored a fundamental reality of nuclear physics. While the hypothetical power capsule kept the actual uranium contained, the fission process inherently emits lethal doses of neutrons and gamma radiation. You cannot simply engineer around radiation with clever mechanics. The only way to stop these high-energy particles is by putting sheer mass between the reactor core and human tissue. Lead is highly effective at blocking gamma rays, while materials rich in hydrogen, like water or concrete, are required to slow down fast-moving neutrons. To adequately protect the driver and passengers sitting in the front cabin, the miniature reactor would need to be encased in approximately 5 feet of these dense materials in every direction. Wrapping a single power capsule in that much biological shielding would add roughly 50 tons of dead weight to the vehicle. The heavy-duty electronic suspension systems Ford imagined could never support this. No consumer vehicle frame, rubber tire, or standard 1950s asphalt road could withstand a passenger car that weighed more than a fully loaded commercial semi-truck. Because of this massive volume requirement, the physical dimensions of the 3/8 scale Nucleon model were entirely divorced from reality. Modern engineering analysis reveals that the concept's proportions were so wildly inaccurate that building a working prototype was mathematically impossible. Ford placed the cabin as far forward as possible to maximize the distance from the radiation source, but the math still fell incredibly short. If engineers actually incorporated the required 5 feet of shielding while maintaining the vehicle's sleek, futuristic silhouette, fitting a normal adult human into the driver's seat would require scaling the entire car up. The Nucleon would have to measure an astonishing 26 feet long just to function. Driving a 50-ton, 26-foot Leviathan to the grocery store would be a logistical nightmare. Yet, the absolute highest hurdle for the atomic car was basic highway safety. In a conventional vehicle, a severe collision usually results in crumpled steel and spilled gasoline. Replacing that gasoline with a miniature nuclear reactor turns a standard traffic accident into a radiological catastrophe. Consider what a high-speed crash, or even a severe fender bender, would do to that rear-mounted reactor. If an impact ruptured the primary containment vessel or severed the pressurized coolant lines, the core would immediately lose its ability to cool itself. The system would instantly vent superheated, highly radioactive steam directly across the highway. A multi-car pileup would essentially trigger a localized meltdown event. Emergency responders would require specialized hazard suits just to approach the wreckage. A single tragic crash could permanently contaminate miles of interstate infrastructure, instantly transforming ordinary suburban neighborhoods into hazardous exclusion zones. Ultimately, the Ford Nucleon was never meant for production. It was a brilliant public relations exercise that captured the limitless imagination of the atomic age. It reminds us to keep dreaming big, even when science has not quite caught up. Thank you for watching. Tell me in the comments which concept to cover next, and subscribe for more deep dives into forgotten history and crazy engineering marvels.